Hello guys, in this video we will look at how to validate post requests to Node.js API using Joy library. Joy lets you describe your data using a simple, intuitive and readable language. We will also look at how to turn Joy errors into 422 validation error API responses. Let's get started. First, we will create a new post request route in OpenAPI documentation to create a travel. In the OpenAPI.yaml file, we're going to have a post with the tags and will be travels. The summary, we're going to have a create travel, and operation ID will be also create travel. Then we're going to have a description, and we have a request body with a description payload request to create a travel, and required will be true, and we will put reference with the components request bodies create travel body. And then we're going to put responses 200, have a description of travel, and it will return content application JSON, and schema is going to have travel with the properties of components schemas travel. And then we also have a default response, which will be a default error response. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the request bodies in the components and create travel body. Right here in the components we have request bodies, create travel body, and the content is application JSON, and we have schema as an object. We will have two required fields, name and number of days, and we're going to have name as a string. Description is going to be optional, also going to be string number of days, and we also have is public boolean true. We will also going to update error response to include validation errors. Let's go ahead and look at that. And right over here we have default error in schemas. We'll add a property errors with the type of an array, and this object will have a property of message, and it will be a type of string, and let's say example will be name is required. Those are the changes that we need to make to the OpenAPI. The next step will be to create a post route to create travels. Let's go to src folder, routes. We're going to go to travels and index, and we'll put right here travels.post. And we're going to have a validate request middleware that we're going to create with a create travel schema. And we also have a create travel function from the controller. Let's go ahead and add it, create travel. And now let's go in the controller and create that function. In the controller.cs file, let's go ahead and export const travel as sync function, request response, and next as usual. And we're going to create a new travel repository. And then we're going to have a travel resource with a new travel resource. And we're going to have an await repository create. And this travel repository will attempt to create a new travel in the database. And if everything is successful, we will return status 201 created, and then travel with a travel resource and item. However, if things fails, we're going to catch an error and pass it to error handler middleware. As you can see, create method doesn't exist on travel repository. Let's go ahead and add create method in a base repository. Since travel repository inherits from base repository, this method will be also available in travel repository. Let's go to repositories, base repository, and let's put the following code in there. Right after get by ID, we're going to have create method, and it will accept body, and we'll return a promise, and we'll take a model class, and we'll pass the body to create method of the model class. Since we are returning create travel using travel resource, the tours relationship won't be available. So let's go ahead and update base resource to account for that. We will open resources and base resource and go to the collection method. And in the beginning of the collection method, we will put the following if statement. If there are no entities, we're going to return empty array. Let's go ahead and switch into the base repository. And as you may have noticed, in base repository's create method, we're simply creating a travel from the body of the request. But we can't rely on a user sending us all the necessary fields to create a travel. We need to validate the body of the request to be sure we get required fields to create a travel. This is where Joy library comes into play. Let's go ahead and install Joy and its types. We're gonna run yarn add Joy and also yarn add at types joy --dev. In the middleware folder, let's create a new file and call it request schema.ts. In the request schemas.ts file, let's export create travel schema. We're going to import Joy from Joy, and we're going to export const create travel schema, and we'll put a Joy as object. The first property will be name, and it's going to be string. We'll put a minimum 3, maximum 30, and it will be required. The description will be also string. Number of days, it will be number, integer, greater than 0, and it will be also required. Is public will be Joy boolean, and default will be true. Next, we will need to create a middleware that will validate request body using this schema. In the middleware folder, let's also create validate request.ts file. Let's go ahead and import next function, request and response from Express. We will import object schema from Joy, and then we're going to do export default function, and then we'll call validate request, and we'll take schema, right? This function will be returning an async function, which will be the actual middleware that will take request, response, and next function. So validate request is a higher order function. And then we're going to check if there is no request body, we'll just simply go next. However, if there is one, we're going to try to validate schema, and we will be using the validate async method, and we'll pass the request body. We'll put abort early false so it can validate all the fields, and we're going to catch an error. And if there is an error, we will pass it to the error handler, and then we're going to return. If there is no errors, we're just going to call next. Finally, let's go back to routes v1 travels index.ts file and import validate request, middleware, and request schema that we created. Create travel request validation is complete. However, we need to handle Joy errors. Let's update types.ts file to include validation error type. We will also move error name and error code types from API error.ts. Let's go ahead to errors and API error, and let's go ahead and cut out the types right here. And we're going to go to the types.d.ts, and we're going to paste them in here. Now let's create a validation error type. It will have an error. Message will be string, code will be error code, and errors array of object that it has property message, which is string. Finally, let's go ahead and update error handlers code. Let's go ahead and put an if block that will check if it's a Joy error. If it is, we're going to create a validation error with a message validation error, code error valid, and errors, error details will go over each item of Joy error, and we'll put an item message in there. And then we're going to be returning status 422 and JSON of this validation error. Let's go ahead and also import Joy. And we also need to add error valid to error code type. So let's go back to types, and right here, and let's put another type. And now we can save the changes. Let's go ahead and test the code. We're gonna run yarn dev. Let's go to open API document. We're going to open it up. We have post create travels, right? So we're going to hit try it out, and we're going to click execute because we already have an example right here. And as we can see, the travel is created. It says my cool travel and the number of days 3. Now we can go ahead and remove name. Let's go ahead and click execute, and we're going to get 422, and we can see that's a validation error, and the message is going to say that error is required. Now let's put the name back and do an additional property. We'll call it greeting, and we'll say hello, and we're going to click execute again. As you can see, we got again 422, and now message says that greeting field is not allowed. Finally, let's test number of days. Instead of 3, let's go ahead and put -3 and click execute. And again, we got 422, and the number of days must be greater than 0. And this is how you can easily validate request payloads with Joy library in Node.js API. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.